Today I'm walking on Trellis Drive in Terra Linda, California, and this is going to be my last week of making videos here in California, and then I'll be on my way back to Florida pretty soon. So I am going to miss it here, but I'm also looking forward to going back to Florida now that it's starting to get kind of colder and cloudier. It's starting to look more like winter in California and starting to look more like winter in Florida, if you know what I mean. But anyways, in the past, I have discussed on several different occasions just how important it is to own the land that you park a mobile home on. Because what's been happening to a lot of people is they rent the land at a mobile home park for many, many years. Then the park will get sold to somebody else. And then all of a sudden, that lot rent can double or triple overnight, and there's not really anything you can do about it besides abandon ship and be kicked out of your home, unless you have the money and the means to move one of those mobile homes, which can be quite expensive. And so one of my viewers sent me this story about a similar situation, but a little bit different. There is a campground in Pennsylvania called Laurel Highlands, and the name of the campground is called Roaring Run Campground. And there are hundreds of families who purchased a lifetime membership to this campground so that way they could camp there forever. Many of these families spent anywhere between $10,000 and $16,000 under the impression that they could camp there indefinitely until they died. And right off the bat, you can see how this story has a lot of similarities to people who live in mobile home parks that have decent lot rent that they can afford, and they think that they're just going to be able to live there indefinitely until they pass away. And so naturally, a lot of these families with lifetime membership have built a community there. They plan on retiring there and spending the rest of their lives there. And the original owner of this campground recently just sold it to a Texas-based company called Tannery LLC for $2.5 million. And the owner told all of the members that their contracts would be honored by the new owners. However, after the sale of the property, the Tannery LLC, who was the purchaser of the land, sent out an email to the people with lifetime memberships stating that these lifetime memberships were not included in the sale and are now null and void. So all these people who thought they were going to be able to stay there forever just got rug pulled. And this email also warned these people that failure to comply would result in legal action and force their removal. Essentially, if you don't leave, we're going to evict you using the law. And the first thing I want to mention here before we move any further is anytime you're in a situation like this where there's like a verbal agreement or there's nothing in writing, and you don't have any sort of contract that states that you actually have this lifetime membership, it's just like something the owner told you that you have, that's a big problem. Now, I don't know if these people actually had anything in writing promising that they have it, but even if they did, if it wasn't part of the sale agreement like the new company says, well, it doesn't really matter. So now all these people with lifetime memberships were told that they have to pay the new fees or get out. And the new fees are either $60 a day, $250 a week, or $3,000 per season. You don't like it? Leave or we'll evict you. And this is really the ultimate betrayal because a lot of people really feel burned by this, and rightfully so. A lot of them say they spent their life savings to secure their spot, and retirees who plan to spend the rest of their years there no longer can afford it. And besides being screwed over financially, the deep community and bonds that a lot of these people have made in this campground are now going to be severed if people are actually forced to leave. And it really is wrong, guys. It's the wrong thing to do. The fact that this company is not honoring the agreement is shameful, to say the least. But LLCs and corporations are faceless, right? Of course, there's always some greedy guy at the top pulling the strings, and ultimately that's what's happening here. But they don't have remorse. They're buying this campground for the bottom line. It's a business decision in order to earn money. It's not, oh, I've owned this place since day one. I have a relationship with all the people that stay here and I want to keep them comfortable and happy. Well, I can make a profit too. It's not that. And this just shows you the stark difference between a corporate landlord and a mom and pop landlord. And nobody really knows what's the issue at this point, but a lot of the people with the campground lifetime memberships are accusing the previous owner of selling memberships knowing that they would not transfer over with the property. So essentially taking those big payouts as some sort of underhanded scheme to retire and walk away forever from this campground, make a little extra cash, and then screw everybody over once the business deal is finalized. And this guy does seem pretty suspicious because after several requests to put him on camera and interview him for this story, he keeps running away from the cameras and is avoiding and refusing to answer the questions about what happened here. And to me, that's a huge red flag, meaning that he probably did know that this was not going to work out, and it's just a cash grab for him and didn't care about the people he was taking the money from. And a lot of these lifetime members say that they are trying to fight back legally. And the new owner's attorney actually says they want to clean up the mess and are open to discussion. So that tells me right away that the new owner actually wants some sort of solution to this, but maybe the new owner never agreed to this lifetime membership deal that the previous owner was promising everybody. It was never in the negotiations or the final contract. And then all of a sudden they get blindsided with that once they own the place. So, right away it looks like the new owner is the villain. But in this case, it could actually be the previous owner that screwed over everybody who thought they were getting a lifetime deal. So it's going to be interesting to see who's ultimately liable and what actually ends up happening with this people. I hope that there's a follow-up story to this. The problem with sometimes when these stories come out in the news is you initially hear about what happened, but then there's never a follow-up with the conclusion of how it all finally ended up. So hopefully we find out what happens, and I hope a lot of these people that got sold these lifetime memberships get to keep them, and that gets honored. And that would be the right thing to do from the new owners. Maybe they would have them pay a little bit extra or something, since that was not something included in their sale, but it would be better than losing that opportunity altogether. But really the lesson here is, guys, is you never really ever want to own something like a trailer or a mobile home or a manufactured house and have it sit on someone else's land that you rent, because you are always susceptible to situations like this. And I've already covered dozens of stories similar to this one over the years, highlighting just how vulnerable you are. And these things happen at a moment's notice. Look, this place was sold. All of a sudden, everybody is getting kicked out. And it's not just people being kicked out of mobile home parks and campgrounds. It's also people being kicked out of being able to own a home, because it turns out now you have to be 40 years old just to be able to buy a house. And that's what the latest data is showing us right now, because the share of first-time home buyers just dropped to a record low of 21%, meaning we have never seen this few of first-time home buyers in the housing market ever since they started keeping track. And the typical age for first-time home buyers has now climbed to 40 years old, which is also at an all-time high, according to the National Association of Realtors. And this is just stunning to me, especially. Like, I started in real estate, guys, in 2009 during the housing downturn, and I had a lot of first-time home buyers back then because there was a lot of incentive for first-time home buyers. There were down payment assistance programs, stimulus from the government, of course, to try and reinvigorate the housing market. And a lot of people took advantage of that. And I had many first-time home buyers work with me that were in their mid or late 20s, sometimes early 30s. And that was the pretty normal age group for a first-time home buyer. But fast forward 16 years later, now the average age of a home buyer, of the first-time home buyer, is 40 years old. You have to be middle-aged now to be able to save enough money and be able to accumulate enough wealth and savings and financial stability just to be able to buy a house these days. And it just makes you wonder, like, if in 2025, the average first-time home buyer is 40 years old, what is it going to be in another 10 or 15 years from now? Is it going to be 50 years old? And then another 15 years later, it's going to be 60 years old? Like, you're pretty much going to be at retirement age in the near future by the time you can actually afford a house? Is that where things are moving right now? They say the share of first-time home buyers in the market has contracted by 50% since 2007. Well, like I've been telling you guys, it's not all bad news with the housing market. There are a lot of signs that things are starting to look up for first-time home buyers and people that have had a hard time getting into the market, because a lot of things are turning in your favor and turning this into a buyer's market. But it is a very slow and steady change. It's not something that's happening overnight. It's been slowly transitioning to a buyer's market over the past couple of years. And if things continue on this trajectory, it will continue to slowly transition into a buyer's market over the next 3 to 5 years. And when it comes to building home equity, which has been the primary way most Americans build wealth, which is not really the greatest way to build wealth, but it has been the primary way nonetheless, this major setback in age to buy your first home can also be a big setback in ultimate home equity that you accumulate. They say that difference between buying at age 30 and buying at age 40 can mean losing roughly $150,000 in equity on a starter home. And this is ultimately my argument of why housing cannot continue to go up forever. I know a lot of people say, well, because inflation is still going up at an alarming clip, this is going to be why housing continues to go up regardless of affordability. But that's just not true, because we already see it reflected in the data right now. Even though inflation is still at a 3 handle, according to the official data, which means it's probably well over 6, in reality, home prices have been coming down, not only nominally, but also adjusted for inflation in many areas of the country. And that's because demand is extremely low. And that proves that time and time again, the housing market is built on supply and demand. People can ask whatever they want when it comes to purchasing a home, but if no one can afford it, they will have to lower the price if they want to get that house sold. That's just the way it goes. And even repeat buyers, somebody who's bought a home before and is purchasing right now in 2025, take a look at this. The median age of a repeat buyer in 2025 is 62 years old. Imagine signing a 30-year mortgage, or even a 15-year mortgage for that matter, at the age of 62. You are old enough to collect Social Security and you are buying a new house. Yeah, sometimes it's all cash. 30% of them were actually all cash buyers, which means 70% of them are not. So this keeps proving my point that it's really a small percentage of wealthy people that are truly buying houses right now, and everybody else is on the sidelines, guys. And no matter what happens with inflation, it doesn't really matter. You're having a smaller and smaller group of people that can actually afford to buy homes, and that's ultimately going to leave us with a supply glut of inventory on the market. You can't keep going in this direction and expect houses to sell if the average home buyer cannot afford to buy. Yes, inflation typically does raise home values because people turn to hard assets like real estate in times of high inflation. But only the wealthy have the ability to do that. Most people don't, and they can't buy everything. And they're not going to buy them all as rentals either, because with the cost of housing today, combined with interest rates, taxes, and insurance, it just makes zero financial sense to buy rentals in a lot of cases. You are losing money. You're not making any positive cash flow on most purchases today. If you could still make money on all of the real estate that's out there available for sale, we would probably still have a supply shortage. Even I would be buying real estate right now if it was a good opportunity to turn it into cash, but it just isn't. And that's why we are seeing an uptick in popularity with in-law suites, for example. Like, a lot of people are building in-law suites, or here in California, they call them ADUs, in their backyard, which stands for accessory dwelling unit, which is essentially a small little house in your backyard that somebody else can live in, whether it's a relative, whether it's somebody else. Here in California, they actually can sell these now to somebody else. You can have this house right here, build an ADU in the backyard, and sell that ADU to some stranger that's living in your backyard. In fact, I saw a sign for an open house the other day. It said ADU open house. I didn't have a chance to go to it, but if they do it again before I leave, I'm definitely going to go check it out and take a little video for you guys and show you, because I've never seen anything like that before. But this just goes to show you how desperate the housing situation is getting right now. People are having to pool their resources and live in situations that were not necessary in the past. According to the Pew Research Center, the share of multi-generational homes rose from 7% in 1971 to 18% as of the 2021 numbers. They are 4 years behind on this data. So imagine what it is now. It's probably well over 20% of people are looking at doing this right now. And the reason is simple. As homes have become less affordable, the number of multi-generational households tends to increase. And that's out of necessity. And one thing I was discussing with my friends here the other day when we were talking about these ADUs, like say you have an ADU in your backyard and you want to sell it to somebody else. Well, that's great. Now somebody else has an affordable place to live. But what happens when you want to sell your house and the new owner doesn't want that person living in their backyard? Like, it opens up this whole new can of worms that people have to deal with just because housing has become so unaffordable. And obviously, yeah, people are creative. They're going to find ways to make things work, even when it doesn't work right now. And that's what this is all about. But I'm sure most people are not going to consider this a real solution for them, especially if you have a family. Maybe it's great for grandma who's retired living in the backyard in the in-law suite, or a single guy that's never home that just needs a place to sleep. That's fine. But this is not a permanent solution to this problem. Also, if you do have an in-law suite or you decide to add one at a later date, there's actually some real world consequences to doing this. Mainly the fact that you're going to see an increase in your property taxes, as if they're already not high enough. Because when you make an addition to any home, like adding on an in-law suite, for example, this is going to result in an increase in your property taxes and your homeowner's insurance probably. So no matter how creative people get, there's always going to be a downside to everything, guys. There are pros and cons to all of it. And this is the perfect example. You try to have an extra source of income or a way to have your family all live under one roof for less money for everybody. But in the end, it can actually end up costing you more. I mean, think about it. If the increase in your homeowner's insurance and property taxes is significant enough, it might actually be cheaper to just have grandma live in a one-bedroom apartment that you can rent for less money than that increase you would get on those other expenses. So you got to look into this kind of stuff before just pulling the trigger and building one of these. And the same goes for anybody doing it to try to make a little extra income as well. Now, one more thing that shows us just how shaky ground this economy is on right now is the share of Americans who are taking on subprime loans. It continues to increase. What does that mean? Well, the share of customers taking on subprime loans accounted for 14.4% of all borrowers in the third quarter, up from 13.9% in the same period in 2024. And it's also the highest since 2019, according to TransUnion. Also, according to TransUnion, about 25% of the US population now has a FICO credit score below 660, meaning that they are now subprime borrowers. What does it mean to be a subprime borrower? It's when you are a high-risk candidate for getting a loan, which means that your loan terms are going to be not very favorable for you and extremely favorable for the lender. They're going to give you less money at a higher interest rate with less favorable repayment terms. This is why I'm always telling people to be out of debt or have as little debt as possible. Make sure you have a healthy income compared to what you spend and have a decent credit score, because if you do all those things, you are not going to be a subprime borrower and you're going to have access to more favorable rates and lending conditions. And subprime borrowers are risky because the share of subprime borrowers who are at least 60 days late on auto loans, for example, has reached 6.43%, which is double what it was back in 2021. And property data from Adam shows us that August marked the 6th straight month of year-over-year rising in home foreclosure filings. And at the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, we have something called super prime borrowers, which are people that are very favorable to loan to, and that number actually jumped as well. Super prime borrowers went from 37.1% in 2019 to 40.9% in 2025. That's 16 million more people since 2019, and these borrowers have higher credit scores and are likely to get more favorable loan terms, like lower interest rates and higher credit limits. And that's why it pays off to be in the super prime category. And what this shows us is the ever-increasing K-shaped economy, where you have one sector of the economy, which is definitely the minority, doing better than ever right now because they were just at the right place at the right time and were able to capture a lot of the wealth that was created over the past 5 or 6 years. And then there's everyone else at the bottom of the K that continues to see their wealth dwindle as inflation continues to rip. Sure, high income and super prime borrowers are definitely subject to inflation and do feel it a little bit, but nowhere near people on the lower end of the spectrum, which is most people. And essentially what this shows us is we are losing the middle class. We have been for a long time, but never has it been more noticeable or obvious than it is right now. And the problem is once we lose the middle class, we're in trouble. You know, when there's too many people at the bottom and only a small group at the top, that is a recipe for disaster. And that's when we're going to see a lot of real trouble in this country. And it's also when the entire economic system is going to basically collapse, because you can't rely on the top 10% of earners to continue carrying this economy forward indefinitely. Also, just the social unrest that's going to come from this, with too many people getting left behind and not being able to afford food or housing or any of the other basic necessities, is going to cause some major issues for everyone, regardless of where you stand on the social hierarchy ladder. And that's why everything I continue to share with you guys on this channel, I try to hope that somebody just takes one little nugget of wisdom from it. So that way you can try to at least put yourself one notch higher on the ladder and be just a little bit further ahead than the next guy. And the more people that do this and the more people this message reaches, then the better off a lot of people are going to be. Ultimately, it's going to be good for society. So that's what I try to do on this channel, and that's what I'm hoping a lot of people get out of this. And even if it only helps a few people per week, well, I consider that a success. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.